So as we continue this morning's session, I'd like to encourage everyone to begin this morning's session by generating bodhicitta, the right intent, knowing that whatever we do, whatever we are engaging in hearing, contemplating, reflecting, meditating, engaging in the different actions of Dharma, may it be for no other purpose than for the liberation of all sentient beings. Generating bodhicitta in intent, we are discussing the subject of this Dzogchen text, the very profound text, referred to as the 3 words that strike the vital essence, which comprises of, which is often also known as the quintessence, the squeezed essence of all the 6,084,000 different tantras that are there. And therefore, in short, all of the Tantrayana or the Mantrayana teachings that are gathered into the essence of what is right view, what is right meditation, what is right action, are said to be pointed out, and therefore called the 3 words that strike the vital point, the very quintessence point, or the very essential, crucial point, are gathered within it. And therefore, these teachings that come down to us in the form of the transmissions or the teachings of Garabdoji Bharavaja to Manjushri Mitra, his heart student or the main disciple. And so the sort of the historical background of it is Manjushri Mitra, a very, very well-known adept scholar, learned person, had challenged Garabdoji Bharavaja, who was a renowned Mahasiddha of his time. And so Manjushri Mitra challenges Garabdoji to a very fierce debate. And of course, debating for many days, ultimately it is said that Manjushri Mitra lost this debate. And he was in such full regret, so much of remorse about his doubt regarding the realization of Bharavaja, Garabdoji, that as a sort of a remorse, as a sign of regret and penance, because he came from a Brahmanical background, he decided to cut off his tongue because he was very proud of his being a scholar, being very learned. And so he thought that the best way to express his regret at having ever doubted the realization of Garabdoji was to cut off that very organ that would sort of allow him to manifest his learnedness. And so Garabdoji stops him from cutting his tongues off, saying, that's not going to solve any problem at all. So in its stead, it would be good if you practiced humility. And Manjushri Mitra is said to have become Bharavaja's student at that time. And he studied with Garabdoji for 75 years, stayed with Garabdoji for 75 years. And so, however, one of the very sort of these sweet things in this sort of anecdote or the story is that when Garabdoji passed away, Manjushri Mitra then weeps, even after 75 years of studying with the same teacher, with so much devotion. He says the very thing that I think you and I would say to our teachers is that don't die is the first request, which of course when Garab Dorje passes away, he doesn't sort of stay back. So Manjushri Mitra then changes his request to, could you squeeze these 75 years of teachings that you have transmitted to me into the simplest form? What is the quintessence of all the 75 years of teachings that you have given to me? What is it that I could keep in mind? And that would allow me to know that by keeping this essence in mind, I would not be separated from all that what I have been so fortunate in receiving from you. And it is said that at that time, from the heart of Garab Dorje arose a thumb-sized casket. Within it was a scroll written, it is said, in Lapis Lazuli ink. And in the scroll, as Manjushri Mitra opens it, he finds 3 lines. These 3 lines then became the basis of what is today called these 3 words that strike the vital point. So that's the origin. In the scroll are these 3 lines. And so those 3 lines became the root verse of all of the Dzogchen texts. And why this text is read so much, practiced so much, taught so much, is that by reflecting upon it, it allows you to get the root of what Vajrayana Buddhism is. And in other words, in simple words, it is said that, as we were talking about yesterday, the fascination that we have psychologically of being spiritual people in the very beginning, when we choose to turn our mind to Dharma or any spiritual philosophy, there's a real brilliant searching mind, an explorer's mind, which is always one of the most nourished and very cherished, I think, aspiration or a motivation. But somehow, we human beings tend to have that fresh attitude in the beginning. But once you come close to what you have been searching for, you find the answer. It's almost like any other commodity. When you don't have it, you really search for it, long for it. When you get it, you put it on the mantel shelf. And occasionally you look at it, but somehow the sort of enthusiasm that should be there often wanes when you have obtained it. So in Dharma, in spirituality also, the fresh heart, the fresh attitude is brilliant. So many of you who have experienced that, when you first were looking at a book on the Himalayas, or saw a picture of a teacher, or first encountered a wonderful book that inspired you, and you think about, oh, this is what I was looking for. This is what is my search leading me to unearthing something good, intrinsic of myself, inherent of myself. And so you meet the first teachers, you get the first practices, you read the first books. It's very exciting, very enthusiastic, very inspirational. But then after some time with it, we sort of become lost in more what I call religiosity, a mindset that is more religious. And then everything becomes more obligatory rather than inspired and enthusiastic. Of course, we tend to never think that it is something that we are obligated to, and we sort of use nice words such as faith or devotion, or sort of sense of understanding the worth of what you are doing. And partly, yes, that enthusiasm still is there. We're not denying that. But on the other hand, there's a stateness, there's a sort of a staleness, a jadedness that comes into our own practice, where then the life of a struggling, not so successful, sometimes successful spiritual practitioner begins to become something that we are at peace with. And we begin to remain and stagnate ourselves within that kind of a structure. So this is something that has to be very carefully examined within each practitioner, because then you get lost in words, you get lost in forms, you get lost in postures, you get lost in very profound rhetoric and philosophy, and that's where the teachers say it's like a dog chasing the tail. So then we keep going sort of in circles and spinning within the rhetorics of philosophies, and nobody can shut us up either, because we have profound words to argue with. We can talk about very profound things like emptiness and non-duality and natural space and Mahamudra and Dzogchen and rest there and relax here and breathe properly and radiate properly and what is luminosity, what is non-duality. So after a few years of being with Buddha Dharma, your vocabulary becomes so sophisticated that there's hardly any other person who can argue with you without your having a sensible answer to, sort of revert that question, that hesitation. So then, of course, those that you lose from, you call them ignorant. Or you're ignorant, you don't realize what the absolute true nature is. And that's what we use as defense. But the reality is that that's an outer shell. And it may not necessarily always lead to a transcendence, where transcendence is most required. So therefore, as we talked about last evening, even devotion becomes more an outer expression, that it is never expressed with transcendence. The ripening and the fruition that should be the genuine expression of gratitude and devotion may not necessarily take place, or it takes more long a time than is actually necessary. In the same way, compassion is profoundly that we hold as being absolute in our tradition or practice, but it may not necessarily transcend, completely be embodied within one's own body, speech, and mind. And so being able to see the distance that you unnecessarily create between what the true nature is, what the true essence of realization is, your own fruition and your own path of practice becomes important. And to do that, the most important thing is not to be lost in rhetoric, not to be lost in too many nets, not to be lost chasing after many forms of practices, not to be lost in too many philosophical sort of rhetorics, not to be lost in your own conceptual ideas of what Dharma may be, not to get lost in the tragedies of spirituality, not to get lost in the romantic notions of spirituality, but to come straight to the crucial point of knowing this is the view, this is what I'm meditating upon, and then challenging yourself to seeing whether you are absolutely honest with it or not, which is only possible by examining your actions, your conduct. If the conduct resembles the view that you have understood, your intellectual mind has recognized, and that this is what you have become familiar with, so much so that you're breathing, just as you normally, naturally, without any preparation, breathe. In the same way, you breathe that view in your actions of body, speech, and mind. That is called unity of view, meditation, and action. And therefore, if that is understood in a meditator, then realization, enlightenment is definitely not at all difficult. Enlightenment shouldn't be made difficult. And that's one of the problems that we have had, is we ourselves getting lost in the religiosity of everything, allowed ourselves to imagine enlightenment as being something very difficult, very inaccessible, something that has to require years and years of hardship. And then you begin to make a list of all the things that you need to do before you can get enlightened. How many teachers you need to know, how many pilgrimages you need to do, how many different forms of meditation you have to do, how many deities you have to do, 1 million of this, 1 billion of that, all of the learnings in the books. And each year you acquire these because you think, here is what was missing. Because if I acquire this, then I'm going to get enlightened. And so bookshelves get heavier and heavier. The shrine has no more place for any more statues or thangkas. You keep taking down all of your old paintings to replace them with more thangkas and pictures and postcards of your teachers' faces and so forth. But they're all out there. And the mind still remains the same mind that has the same little inkling of enthusiasm and understanding and exploration, but it hasn't gone through exact transformation. And therefore, the intent behind wonderful teachings such as the Siksun Nedek is said to be so that one is not lost, but gets to the crucial, bringing the mind back to the crucial point of this is the view. What's the bringing back to what am I supposed to be meditating upon? Bringing back to, because I'm a Buddhist, therefore my actions should be this way, and that I do not have the luxury of being anything else. My actions cannot be. I do not have the luxury of pretending to know something that I will not do. I do not have the luxury of meditating and it not being present and implicated in the actions of my own body, speech, and mind. Strengthening that sense of getting to the very essence, the very crucial point, is the intention of such a text as this. Now, these teachings that were given by Garam Dorji in the form of these 3 words or 3 lines, and so often there's these 2 sort of branches or sort of ways, aspects you would call, a way of looking at the text. In a way, these texts, through the times, were transmitted from masters to their own students and read and practiced throughout the ages of the teachings. But closer to the 19th century, these teachings found sort of a revival, re-strengthening. And this was brought about by Khandro, one of the great Dzogchen masters of the Indian lineage. And it is said that his own transmissions came from Javin Yugu, the teacher, whose teacher was Jigme Lingpa, whose name is also, another name for Jigme Lingpa is Khense Wese, whose master below is then Longchen Ra. So Longchen Rabjab, then Jigme Lingpa, then Javin Yugu, and then Javin Yugu transmitting this to Jigme Javin Yugu, transmitting it to Khandro Rinpoche. So it is Khandro Rinpoche's effort that made the text what it is today. Beyond the 3 lines, the commentary that is most widely read and studied is Khandro Rinpoche's own words. Now, because Khandro Rinpoche himself, having propagated and taught this teaching a lot, he then coined also this word that we use, or this title that we use, which says 3 words that strike the vital essence, and therefore using Longchen Rabjab to meaning the view of infinite space, Khense Wese, the meditation on infinite, on the light of love and wisdom, and the actions of the victorious ones, the Bodhisattva's actions. Before Khandro Rinpoche's commentaries, this title of the text was not so much known as 3 words, but it was referred to as 3 statements. So therefore we find 2 ways of looking at it, and those of you who study the text will find it is referred to in both ways. Some refer to it as 3 words that strike the vital point. In some ways it is also called 3 statements that strike the vital point. The 3 words became much more prevalent after Khandro Rinpoche taught, because he chose the words in correspondence to what we were talking about yesterday, the hearing lineage, where using sound and meaning and trying to understand the difference between arbitrary labels versus meaningful labels. And because of his immense devotion to his teachers, therefore he chose the teachers' names as that which is not an arbitrary label, but a meaningful sound and words that would allow us to immediately access the vital, crucial view, meditation, and action. In the scroll that came, there were more statements. Therefore, the original term for that would be 3 statements. And therefore, if you still have that English translation that was given out yesterday, you will find each of the verses have a bullet, sort of a, in the bold letters. And therefore, at the end of each of the verse, you will find reference to the statements that are there. The first statement is known as introducing directly oneself. I think in the first verse, which says introducing directly the face of Rigpa in itself, that's the first statement. It's a simplified version. It is sort of more in the Tibetan letters or the writings. It is written as introduce directly to oneself. No, introducing oneself directly to one's own nature. Or simply directly seeing the face of Rigpa. Rigpa simply meaning primordial awareness. So introducing yourself to your own intrinsic nature, that's the first statement, referring to the cultivation of the view. second statement, which should be in the bold letters also, but at the end of the verse, the second verse, you will find the second statement, which should read, familiarize oneself with utter confidence. And therefore, that's the second statement pertaining to what is the meaning of meditation. So meditation is gaining utter confidence and familiarity with the view. That is what is seen as meditation. And the third statement is allowing the confidence to lead to victory or to lead to complete liberation, which is that where one is free from all conceptual, dualistic, and defiled actions, and you find victory over all false view, and it is evident in the actions of body, speech, and mind. So these are the three original statements. Therefore, when we study the three words that strike the vital point, you can also refer to it as three statements, and keep the three statements in mind, knowing what the view means. Seeing your own nature, that's the view. Gaining familiarity with it is meditation. And therefore, for Buddhists like ourselves, it becomes necessary to really see it from the perspective of Mahamudra and the Dzogchen teachings, is where great teachers have always said, what is not meditation? So long as the awareness of your own intrinsic nature as is remains vividly something that you are recognizing and working with, that you keep your own nature really close to you, you are able to see the face of your own nature. You could then be doing a headstand and it will still be meditation. You could be doing dishes and it will still be meditation. You could be in the midst of a crowd and it will still be meditation. But when we don't recognize that, then we become stiff and rigid. That's where the religiosity comes in, where we have to, somebody has to sit in front of you, you have to light incense. For example, what I call always the preliminaries that we have now today, sort of become so accustomed to. You have to clock in your meditation. You can't meditate until you light an incense. Then you have to buy a singing bowl, and until someone rings the gong, your mind doesn't meditate. And we say things like, I've been meditating for 15 minutes. What's happening? Or is this the right way to do it? Is this not the right way to do it? Then if we have some little bit of calmness or peacefulness, you immediately want to write a blog on it. What was my experience like? Well, how did you feel? Was this like this? So what happens is it all becomes part of a theatrics. It becomes more of an entertainment, which we think is the sensible thing to do. And this continuously, and you don't do it for one day, you don't do it for 1 week, you don't do it for 1 month, we do it again and again, year after year, year after year. And that's really wasting all of the brilliant potentials that one has. It is wasting all of the marvelous teachings and the presence of the teachers you have had. It's really not treasuring the potential of a human being, of the human life. Not doing so, therefore, exerting effort in sifting through all the theatrics of what we feel is Dharma, to finding where the crucial view, meditation, and action needs to be, is the main intention of engaging in the teachings such as this. So Bhattara Rinpoche, as I said, expounded these teachings, and in his teachings on commentary, he emphasizes tremendously the importance of recognizing Guru, as is within all of the Vajrayana teachings. And therefore, the reasoning behind his referring to the three statements as three words, and using these words in reference to teachers' names, all comes together within the importance of the Vajrayana tradition of the Guru principle. So in the teachings of Vajrayana, we say the Guru is the Buddha, Guru is the Tao, Guru is the Sangha. Without the presence of the Guru in my life, there would be no Buddha, there would be no Dharma, there would be no Sangha. That's absolutely true. So therefore, Bhattara Rinpoche in his commentary says, if you keep the Guru inherent and the meaning of the Guru clearly understood, within that you will find the right view, the right meditation, and the right action as well. But in that way, Bhattara Rinpoche says, Guru and the meaning of the Guru should be understood clearly by all meditators. Guru, there is the outer form, Guru, there is the inner form, and Guru in the secret form. In the beginning, working with the Guru implies you work with the physical nirmanakaya of the Gurus, who are the embodied Buddhas of the 3 times. Through their transmissions and teachings and illuminating the path, you and I, as students of the Dharma, hear the teachings. Yes, of course, the primordial nature, enlightened Buddha is intrinsic. Our own basic nature of our own mind is the enlightened Buddha. It is inherent. But at the same time, if you subtract the presence of all the Gurus in our lives, would we be aware of that intrinsic Buddha nature, intrinsic of one's own self? Many of us are oblivious to it. Just as it is said in the text that a person may die of hunger and thirst and utter poverty, and never realizing that his whole life he had been sitting on an earth, under his mat. The earth, if you dig up, was a huge casket, huge box of great wealth. And never knowing that what he was sitting upon was a treasure. If this person, oblivious to that, dies of hunger and thirst and utter poverty, it is an example quite similar to us, who have this potential of enlightened awakeness, intrinsic of our own selves, but we are marred by our own ignorances, our own distractions, and constant sort of interference with everything else that is outside. So much of preoccupation with outside. Who's doing, what's happening, what's being said, what's being done, who's thinking that, who's that. You know, we have to interfere with even the shades of the sky and the colors of every flower and the movements of every phenomena when there's so much preoccupation with everything external. And we begin to imagine that it's because of me that the sun is rising from the east. And if I don't look carefully, it won't set in the right direction in the west. That if I ignore the sun, that maybe it will start coming out from the south or from the north. And what will the birds know? They won't know which direction to fly properly. Maybe we don't say it in so many words, but if you look carefully at how much interfered our senses are with everything that is external, it almost gives you a sense that you are the epicenter, sort of directing, the executive director of the entire universe. And so when there's so much of that preoccupation external of one's own self, one doesn't have much time to look at self, to what I am, to what my own basic nature is, to what my mind's actual nature is like. Therefore, in that regard, we need, when there's so much of busyness and preoccupation, you do need nirmanakayas to then transmit orally in the hearing lineage all of the profound teachings. And people like you and I have awoken to that. We may not have realized it, but we have an inkling, an indication of what our mind is. Even if we are not constant with it, there are those moments where you and I are very, very lucky in being able to remain within our own basic nature. We may not be good, but we are attempting to it. And that itself is a great accomplishment, which couldn't have arisen without the kindness of the Gurus. Therefore, in the very beginning stages, since everyone is responsible for being able to realize one's own fundamental nature, one is necessary, it becomes necessary to relate to the outer Guru, that's the Nirmanakaya form. Now, however, having done that, what Rinpoche says, however, having worked with the outer Guru, it becomes necessary to then progress to relating to the inner Guru. At that time, you do not drag the outer Guru with you. Now, that's the mistake that happens, is when you drag the outer Guru far too long, then like in any relationship, this also has full chances that it can get more irritable rather than inspiring. And the inner Guru is referred to as the path, the practice that you do, the path that you do. And therefore, what you have heard from the teacher, you have to begin to practice it. Whatever it is that your mind has recognized, you have to chew on it, you have to digest it. You have to begin to actually walk on the journey. There are do's and don'ts, for example. You abandon defilements. One has to abandon defilements. There are these qualities to cultivate. One has to develop these qualities. Jokingly, I always say, in the West, it was a great sort of a, not entirely a shock, but maybe a surprise, when I would walk into the bathrooms of the different houses or the Dharma centers. And nowadays, I don't see this very much so often, because maybe more people are aware of what they're doing. But in the 80s and 90s, the 59 slogans of Adishas, teaching, the Lojong slogans, the mind training slogans, used to be there in a poster, a very beautiful poster where all the slogans were enumerated, listed. And most of the Buddhists had that Lojong slogans stuck behind the bathroom door. I have no idea where it started from. But I always remember being very struck by that. Of course the bathroom is sometimes the most contemplated place. Maybe that was the whole point of it. But it's a sense of it being there. Now, of course, if you take that as this is the only quiet place in the house, this is the only place where you're very contemplative or focused, and therefore you are reading this. Now, that maybe all those with good intentions, there's a meaning and a purpose to that, but I always found it rather amusing that it should be not in a shrine room, but there. But the best would be is that it's imprinted in your mind, because if you're listening to those, if you're hearing those teachings, their Buddhist tradition is not to place them high upon an altar, prostrate and offer lamps and incense to them once in a while, and revere them, but never to inculcate them. That's never the point. And therefore, the whole perspective of the Dharma, what you hear, you embody it. You have to keep it in mind. If you know such things as 6 paramitas, and you know how to enumerate them, you can say things like generosity, and patience, and diligence, and ethics, and samadhi, and wisdom. It's not something to just enumerate or talk about or hold as a profound view, but you have to be generous. You have to be ethical. You have to be patient. You have to be diligent. You have to have attention and concentration and wisdom intrinsic of one's own self. If we are hearing about Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Dharma, a book that many of you are studying, and you highlight all those pages and you put, you work and study, and every Tuesdays and Fridays that you have the study groups of study. It's wonderful. But then, after having read the verse, you have to embody it. You have to make it your own beating heart. Has to beat with the rhythm of the wisdoms of those words. That's then engaging on the path. So that path requires, and connecting to it, is then said to be working with the inner guru. When you work with the inner guru, it is time for you to grow up, mature, depending upon the inner guru, and at that time to let behind the fascination for the outer guru. You've received the teachings, you've gotten the transmissions. It is now time, like as in the Western world, children grow up and then find their own house and then become independent of the parents. In the same way, you grow up, you mature, you then experience the practice path itself, and at that time, of course, the respect and the gratitude one feels for the teacher, that remains. But then blindly following, just like the fan club, and sort of following and then remaining with the teachers, the teacher likes me, doesn't like me, how close you are to the teacher or not, whether you have one teacher, many teachers, does the teacher still think of you or not, those things no longer become necessary. One has to gain a certain sense of freedom from that and being confident of one's own self by depending upon the path of the practices. As one engages on the, relates to, and engages on the path and relates to the inner guru, then at a certain point you have to outgrow that inner guru into then relating to the secret guru. Secret guru, according to Khandro, is nothing other than one's own true nature. That's where teachings of Mahamudra and Dzogchen are transmitted to the students, is that you are no longer dependent upon what we call the jingling janglings of Vajrayana. The 4, 5, 6-headed deities and ringing bells every 4 lines and carrying the trumpet and the drums around with you and the shrine and so on and so forth. Then you begin to see that you are no longer dependent upon these means of the path either. There is no more recitation. There is no more accumulation of mantras. There is no more visualization. There is no more different forms that have been so far very helpful for you to actually bring you on the path, to mature you on the path. But having gone through the accomplishment of the path of practices, these are the inner guru practices, there comes a certain point where you have to then begin to relate more to your own fundamental nature, and from that perspective, even those things that are the methods of practices, the mechanics of practices, have to be somewhat seen as more distracting than beneficial for one's own self. Outer Guru, Inner Guru, and the Secret Guru outlines what is the Vajrayana path of practices. In the beginning, receiving empowerments, transmissions, different kinds of oral teachings, then beginning with the mantra practices, preliminary practices, up until the Guru Yoga are all called Outer Guru practices. Inner Guru practices are what we often call Yidam practices, primary deity practices, creation, completion practices, practices that allow you to go through the Tantra understanding of what nature is, what appearance is, what is the non-duality between emptiness and appearance, until it leads to a sense of even the deity is my own mind, mantras and sounds are also my own mind's projection, all thoughts are my own mind's projection, and you come to a point where you are no longer distracted by the dualities of self and the others. There's a much more sense of everything is my mind, but then what is the nature of my mind? That is the transition time, where you begin to then have no more a sense of fascination for all the displays that your senses are working with, and there's a much more deeper sense of knowing all everything to be projections of one's own mind. Mind is said to be empty in nature. Is it really empty? What is the nature of mind? And that is where you then progress from the inner guru to the secret guru, pointing out instructions are given to what your basic nature of mind is like, and you work with that. And therefore, in terms of working with the structure of the Vajrayana practices, again, Rinpoche's teachings, as well as these very essential teachings of the three points, are said to be what works with the secret guru. And therefore, again, one way to look at how progressively we need to progress, but on the other hand, a hint is also being given for people to realize that you would make much more sense of this text if one has had a progressive way of first having worked with the outer guru, then having worked with the inner guru, and then ultimately then resting within the nature of mind, which is then the very absolute view, the very quintessence view of the Dzogchen teachings. So therefore, these teachings, which then form the view, meditation, and action pertaining to the secret guru practices, are what we are looking at. But Rinpoche also says, in general, what is a view should be known as all the teachings, hearings, contemplations, reflecting, analyzing, and introductions of the nature of truth that we are able to see clearly should be seen as categorized as view. So if one just says generally, what do we mean by view? It starts with hearing teachings. One needs to hear a lot of teachings. Not only should one hear the teachings, but it is imperative that we contemplate on what we have heard. One of the most important instructions of Shakyamuni Buddha is very definite, is that nothing that you hear should be left just heard. It has to be taken to examination. It has to be reflected upon. You have to analyze it clearly until you come to a point where you have only two choices. You either prove the Buddha wrong, or you gain the certitude of what has been given to you. And therefore, examining the teachings, what is it that you have heard? Is it really true? Examining, engaging in it so that you are able to really reflect and analyze it clearly. This then forms what is called cultivating the view, because the hearing, the analysis, and the reflecting and contemplating leads you gradually to see what the nature of reality is that is being presented within the Buddha's teachings. And therefore, being introduced to the nature is then said to be cultivating the view. Now this is the general sort of definition. Meditation should be simply seen as familiarization. A very simple general way of looking at meditation. Whenever you say things like, I am meditating, what does it mean is you're giving yourself time to becoming familiar with the view that you have looked at. But then if you meditate without the view, which sometimes we often find people do make the mistake of just doing meditation, but never really allowing the meditation to sustain the view, to becoming familiar with the view. Therefore, not doing so. Meditation has to always be gaining familiarity with the view that you have glimpsed. And so let's take an example. If impermanence is the teaching that you have heard, you have to set out to think, are things really impermanent? Is it really true that things are permanent? Is there anything that I can find that refutes this? Is there anything that I can state that the Buddha is wrong? This is not impermanent. This is permanent. And therefore, searching again and again until your mind completely understands the reality of transitoriness, of change, transformation, and impermanence, so that you begin to actually say, oh yes, everything seems to be changing. This changes, that changes. This is also not permanent. That is also not permanent. I thought it was permanent, but this is also changing all the time. How oblivious I was to the constant change and influx that is constantly there. How could I not notice it? Therefore, seeing change, if you rest within that, if you rest within noticing the change, noticing the impermanence, reflecting upon the nature of impermanence, that would be gaining meditation, taking view into meditation. Therefore, meditation, according to Rinpoche, he defines it as gaining confidence of the view by abiding in the continuum of that what you have realized, uninterruptedly remaining within the continuity, the continuum of that view that you have just reflected upon is then said to be meditation. And therefore, if you meditate in that way, it definitely isn't falling into the categories of wrong meditation. We talked about it last evening, such as what Khandro, which is defines as a bear or a gopher hibernating, or as a cocoon, or as an escaping, or just some sort of being spaced out in a very relative sensorial sensation of calmness or peacefulness. And therefore, such wrong meditations which do not have the power of liberation are avoided when one truly allows meditation to just simply mean gaining certainty of the view, allowing the continuum and familiarization of what you have understood, and just giving it chance so that this realization, supported by the meditation, allows you to do the same thing that you have done with defilements and afflictions. For example, you never hear people say things like, I'm sending my children to a coaching class on how to get angry. How to get angry. You don't have to have meditation seminars on how to become jealous. These are things that are very natural because we do them very often. And therefore it's the same. Antidote is the same as the disease itself. Is that we are not awake simply because we are more distracted, because we give distractions a lot more time. In the same way, we're not able to be patient more than we are easily angered or irritated. That's simply because we give irritation and anger, restlessness, and different forms of attachment more time, because we're more familiar with it, and therefore they become more natural. Then in comparison to that, meditation is very little, and that's why when people say things like, how much should I meditate? Then you have to find your own rhythm of meditation. How much time you give to afflictions? Probably the medicine should be a little bit more powerful. But then when the ratio of equation is completely imbalanced, and you have 23 hours and 30 minutes for afflictions and neuroses, and you have half an hour of meditation, then it's entirely up to you whether you think that half an hour is powerful enough to overlap completely and completely sort of overshadow 23 and a half hours of neuroses. Could be possible, we don't know, but it would be nice if it was the other way around. And if you complain sometimes, I meditate 23 hours and the 1 hour of neurosis still doesn't go, then you have a problem and we could talk about it. Then when the balance is really in the reverse way, it doesn't really help. So therefore meditation has to be understood as how much time do you think you need where you can really become confident of the view that you have glimpsed through your own hearing, your own contemplation, reflection, analysis, and really looking at the teachings carefully, glimpsing the teachings. Therefore, meditation, familiarizing with the view, gaining confidence of abiding within a continuum of that awareness of the view uninterruptedly should be seen. In that way, Rinpoche in his commentary says, conduct generally should be defined as challenging the view with confidence. What is the right ethics? What is right ethics in Buddhism? What is right conduct in Buddhism? What is right discipline in Buddhism? Is simply known as challenging oneself, one's own view with confidence. When the view that you uphold as your Dharma, the view of the Dharma, and your own conduct become the same, and there is no discrepancy or contradiction at all, then it is called having the right conduct, conducting yourself with ethics. When the conduct, when your own body, speech, and mind, physical actions, the way you are speaking, the way your mind works, and especially the outlook that you have, it carries the view with it. Decisions you make in life carries the flavor of the view of the Dharma. Judgments and different kinds of opinions that you are generating, if it is fully fragrant, carrying the view of the Dharma. If it is, for example, compassion, and every thought that you have has a sense of compassion in it. You look at somebody else, and your outlook to that person may be, oh, I see that person, but it has the fragrance of love. It has the fragrance of affection. It has the fragrance of sympathetic attitude. That would be carrying the conduct of the Dharma. If you are looking at something and you go to get something, let's say you go shopping, for example, and you see many things, and you're able to buy them, maybe, if you're not able to buy them, but whether you get them or not get them, you still are able to have a certain evenness about it. You're looking at the dining table with the last piece of chicken there, you're aiming at it, someone gets it before you, and you're okay with that. You want it, it's not a big deal. More or less there's a sense of no big deal. You get it, no big deal. You don't get it, no big deal. There's a sense of knowing it, having the happiness, but you're able to bring it to a sense of equilibrium. You have suffering, and we are not inanimate, of course, and therefore we will have feelings. When we have strong feelings, you do have feelings, but at the same time it is able to bring it back down to a sense of evenness, because you see them, oh yes, I feel this unhappiness, but this will also change. You have happiness, sort of suffering and pain, or something very distressing happens to you, you feel it, but then at the same time there's a cushioning effect of knowing this will also change. This also will go through a change. It is cause and effect. It is also going to change. There's a sense of it dissolving. The power of it doesn't become so big that it submerges every bit of sanity and awareness within one's own self. When that kind of an outlook that carries the view into your physical, verbal, and mental actions begins to happen, that is called conduct, or the right conduct, cultivating the right conduct. And therefore, knowing what is view, what is meditation, what is action, a person then has to begin to walk on the journey of realizing true view, meditation, and conduct. And so therefore, in the first verse, if you're looking at the first verse of the commentary, I will just read it out to you and then go through some explanations of it, introducing directly the face of Rinpoche in itself. As for the view of Longchen Labdor, 3 statements strike a vital point. First, relax and release your mind, neither scattered nor concentrated, without pause. While resting in this even state at ease, suddenly let out a mind-shattering pep. fierce, forceful, and abrupt, amazing. There is nothing there, transfixed in wonder, struck by wonder, and yet all is transparent and clear. Fresh, pure, and sudden, so beyond description. Recognize this as pure awareness of Dhammakaya. The first vital point is introducing directly the face of Rigpa in itself. First verse, related to establishing the view. If it were to be simplified, it would all come down into generating two qualities within one's own self. Attention and relaxation. A balance of attention and relaxation. Simply relaxing within the very nature of one's own mind and being aware of that. Attention is the word that we are using that is closely trying to imply an awareness that is uncontrived. A very natural sense of awakenedness that is totally, simply, and naturally relaxed, remaining within that. But for many of you who have the teachings on Mahamudra and Dzogchen, can enter into that state much more naturally based upon all the teachings and the practices that you have received so far. But for many of us who are engaged in this kind of a practice and are new to it, we have to look at it from the perspective of what is it that obstructs us from not being able to do these two simple things. Be awake and completely relaxed within our own nature. And therefore in the commentary it says, one should always know or to be able to see what the true view that points us to the nature of Rigpa within our own self is the immense preoccupation with the three wrong views. And these three wrong views are enumerated as trying to make everything that is interdependent into something that is independent. Trying to construct everything that is emptiness into something that is singular. And trying to make everything that is impermanence into something that is permanent. So three things that we are constantly preoccupied with. Three things, actually, which we call in today's words, I think colloquial word, we say busy. So when people say things like, I'm busy, what do you mean by that? I'm so busy, I'm so exhausted, I'm so very tired. When you sort of go to sleep every night and you think, I'm so busy, I'm so fed up, I'm so very tired, one has a kind of an assumption that you've been doing hundreds of different things. But then Khandro says, actually you're doing only three things. That's making you very, very exhausted and tired. Is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to make everything that is impermanent permanent. You're trying to make everything that is interdependent into something independent. And you're trying to make what is empty in nature into something that is singular and existent. And of course it doesn't stay that way. Since the nature of everything is impermanent, everything changes, but here we are, we're going to be the pioneers of those who find that the Buddha was wrong. We're going to prove things are permanent, and that's what we are struggling with this. We're trying to every day do things that will defy the natural truth of impermanence. So we go out, buy more things. To get more things, we need to earn more. To earn more, and we keep doing this. I was recently driving through Manhattan, and I had just come in from Sikkim at that time. I had gone on a pilgrimage to one of the places in Sikkim, a beautiful place where life is. When we grew up as children, or we grew up in places like this where there was, very little happening. Days were very, very long. 24 hours was 24 long hours. Simply because sun seemed to move slower. Everything moved at a very slower speed because there was less things to do. If you wanted to buy something, you had to plan 10 days ahead and then hope that there was a bus or a car or some vehicle that went by. Otherwise you had to walk for 2-3 days before you got to the first shop where you would buy. And what you would buy? You would buy basics, lentils, rice, flour, oil, that will last you for the next few months. So, now when your needs are less, you need less currency. When you need less currency, you need to work less. When you work less, you have a lot more time. Isn't it? So coming in from Sikkim, I was just thinking about that lifestyle. Nostalgia, of course. But that's it. And then you have the shift. The next day you are in Manhattan. And then you get stuck in the traffic. And you look this side, and you look this side, and it's all clothing stores. You look at it. Amazing to see how many variations of black you can come up with. And each one of them on the mannequins in the storefront, you see this season's fashion. An inch shorter, inch longer, some with one sleeve, some with two sleeves, cut here, not cut there, some with pleats, without pleats. Some look like this, some look like that. It's extraordinary. And then you see $7,000. And I had to turn around and say, do people actually buy that? And yes. And those who own it, work hard the whole year to make it possible to get that, which looks like any other piece of black dress. But on the other hand, this is what drives. And then you would have to think that there are enough people to go into all these thousands of stores that are. Of course, that's there, so you need it. So to need this, you need to work to need it. And that's the churning, that's the spinning, that's the cycle we get into. I'm not against fashion. I'm not talking about don't go out and buy it. But then we're talking about the struggle of trying to make permanent what is impermanent. And therefore, look at ourselves. We buy things, we create things, we plan things, we build things, all with that hope that we are going to be the exceptions of immortal beings, that we're never going to die. We go into a relationship with the firm resolution, this will be different. This will last. This will not change. And then when it does, we look at the person and accuse you for having changed. I never changed. You changed. And that's a shock to us. And we can't accept that. We call it divorce. That's the suffering. We get into the suffering. The rigidity, the stress, the restlessness, the suspicion, the sense of suffering and pressure and dissatisfaction and unfulfillment. All of these are results of the preoccupation constantly, stubbornly refusing to see impermanence. Not only not seeing impermanence, but stating that things, the law of nature, change because I want it. I want this to be permanent, my happiness to be permanent. I want this attainment to be permanent. I want this person to be permanent. I want my wishes to be permanent. And then, since it doesn't happen, it adds to the stress. And since you've gotten into it, it's too late to step back, we think. And therefore, the continuity with which we tighten and hold on to it makes us even more suffer with that sense of experience. In the same way, what is inherently emptiness? Never looking at the compositeness of things, where things are all arising from the ground of space, from the ground of emptiness. But since we are stuck with the arbitrary sounds and words, we are labeling things, and we think that the labeled name that we give, designation that we give, the verbs, the nouns, the pronouns, the adjectives especially that we give are all permanent in nature. And therefore, since things are not as we see, they change, they shift, they have their own natural evolution and dissolution into its own basic nature. And what we demand it to be permanent, we demand it to be singular, we demand it to be existent. And when it doesn't, it creates more stress, it creates more unhappiness in our own minds. In the same way, interdependent. For everything, there are so many things that come into being, and not understanding interdependence. Yesterday we talked about just to get a glass of water, appreciation and a fuller perspective is when you're looking at all the different components that bring into making a glass of water. Now here is a very harmless kind of a example. But when it goes into much more trickier waters, trickier places, where you say such things as thank you, I've always noticed it's always difficult to say thank you, especially in a setting like this. If I say thank you very much, Valerie, by virtue of saying thank you very much, Valerie, I have ignored a lot of people who have worked just as hard. If I thank one teacher, because you thank one teacher, you've ignored many other teachers. So therefore, unless you keep it very general and say thank you all, the one positive, the one thing that you blame or credit for always creates a lot of ripple effects of happinesses and sufferings. And therefore, when we do not understand the interdependentness of many things, two things mainly will evolve, and that is praise and blame. You praise many things, and you blame many things. And it happens indirectly very often times. And we are talking about now these not only being mistaken or distorted views, but it also together has a very important component, according to the Buddhist teachings, karmic consequences. Every time there's a stress, because you demand something to be permanent, and a praise and a blame comes because of that, or a hope and a fear comes because of that, then immediately there is a consequence. A karma has been created, there are consequences. In the same way, when you refuse to see impermanence and you demand that permanence, there's a demand that doesn't happen, and therefore it creates anger, or it creates expectation, or that you are ignorant of that fact of impermanence. It doesn't go completely without consequences. There's always a karma that's created. In the same way, where there is no understanding of interdependence, and because of your not being able to see the codependency, the interdependency, you begin to credit someone, you begin to blame someone, it creates an effect of happiness or suffering. It creates the consequences of praise and blame, hope and fear, expectations and rejections. Immediately there is a consequence, a cause has been created. Where the right conditions come to support the cause, there's always a fruition of that. That's called karma. So then we get into this whole system, is that because of not seeing impermanence, not seeing emptiness, not seeing interdependence, demanding things to be, or falsely imagining things to be permanent, things to be independent, things to be singular and existing, therefore, the karmic causes of that false view is then called suffering, and the suffering arising from ignorance. So the first two noble truths of the Buddha's teachings are based upon is that we suffer. There is a suffering, but the suffering is not random. It has a reason, and the reason, the cause is ignorance. And it is not any kind of ignorance other than ignorance of not knowing the nature, ignorance of not knowing the nature of impermanence, ignorance of not knowing the nature of emptiness, ignorance of not knowing the nature of interdependence. Therefore, prior to getting into the view of resting within Rinpoche essence, it becomes essential for meditators to always spend a lot of time studying the Mahayana teachings, particularly the Mahayana Madhyamika teachings. Throughout the Mahayana Madhyamika teachings, a lot of stress is given into examining the nature of emptiness, particularly emptiness, interdependence, and impermanence. And so here too, prior to resting within the first statement of Garabdorji, or the first word, resting within the nature of infinite expanse of space, those who are newer into Dharma, or still need to go through the inner guru practices, the path of the practices, I would say these three forms of meditation are very important as the preliminaries before you rest within the nature of Rinpoche itself. First, therefore, in the various teachings, but particularly according to Rinpoche's teachings, it says, in order to cultivate the right view, a meditator should engage in the preliminary practices of what are called the three observances, or the three reflections. First is called view of apparent phenomena as they appear. Cultivating the right view of recognizing the nature of phenomena as they appear. Notice the change. In simple words, it would simply be take time to notice the change, whether in formal meditation or whether in informal occasions. And informal is always much more powerful. Go outside into the streets or the park or anywhere. Sit on a bench, sit somewhere and observe movement, observe change. Observe outer change, seasonal change, temperatures change, people passing by change, who comes and goes change. Move inward towards your own self. You have changed. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago, yesterday, this morning, now, and the next moment. Internally, noticing the change. Physically, changes have occurred. Mentally, thoughts, feelings, sensations, emotions. What is there anything that is in the internal world that is not changing? Every breath you take, it changes. Every step you take changes. Every sort of conversation you have goes through a change. Days go through a change. Likes and dislikes go through a change. People you know go through a change. Things you see around the world goes through a change. We're talking about Rinpoche. That has changed. Rinpoche, that has changed. Longchen Ba has changed. Jigme Ba has gone through the changes. Javan Yuga has gone through the changes. Patrobich has gone through the changes. Khandro has gone through the changes. In the same way, Rinpoche has gone through the changes. Everyone has gone through these immense, numerous changes. Taking time to really look at impermanence, to see impermanence. And we're not talking about the melodrama of change and transformation. That's again, I think, something that is very harmful to meditation when people weep and cry because things are changing, he's dying, she's dying. We're not talking about the drama of change, but we're talking about just simple observance, where your mind begins to become attuned to the accepting the fact of transformation. Because the change needs to liberate you into a relaxed mode rather than a stressed up mode. It'll create more stress if you begin to make it like a great tragedy. Sort of, oh, this is sort of changing, that's changing, this is also dying, nothing is remaining, I will die, my mother will die, the teachers will die, I miss my teacher so much. And then good Buddhists always fall in despair and gloom, thinking about impermanence. That's, I think, sort of self-absorbed change. You're looking at change from the perspective of how desperately you don't want to accept it. So that's the wrong way of looking at change. Looking at change has to be filled with joy and happiness. Is that you sort of take a sabbatical from trying to control everything. You allow the free flow of movement and change to be there, and you see it, not making it better, not making it worse, but as a fact, as a reality of the nature of how internal phenomena and external phenomena go through changes. And looking at the movement to a point where you begin to see there's really nothing to hold. There's no need to grasp. There's no need to pressurize yourself into thinking that you need to bring about some kind of change. Just as you sit by a free, calm, flowing river, and each ripple of the water flows to make way for the new one. In the same way, a meditator sits observing flow of time, flow of phenomena, flow of every movement of different kinds of manifestations simply moving by. That's the first thing to take to meditation, is observe and see clearly the nature of change and impermanence. Progressing then into the second observance, which is called view of the nature of phenomena being empty in nature. Or in simple words, is cultivate the view that observes the inherent nature of every phenomena, internal and external, of one's own self. As Rinpoche in his teachings often he says, as a meditator, sit again, whether in formal meditation or informal meditation. Take a park bench, for example, sit there, and then simply work with the question, what is the nature of anything beyond one's assumption of it? What is the nature of anything? beyond your fixation, beyond your assumption of what it is. Look at a tree and say, beyond your assumption that a tree is independent, what is the nature of a tree? And appreciate the manyness, what is called the distinct multiplicity of all the components, where you can broaden your own perspective of a singular object, such as a tree, and then broaden your perspective into holding, not just a tree, but the leaves, the colors, the fruits, the flowers, the branches, the twigs, the trunk, the stem, the root, the seed, who planted it, what made it, how beautiful it is, its many activities that allow so many animals to benefit from it, that you are able to see it. The very components where the tree as a solid fixed object loses into accommodating all of its various components that goes into it. How else otherwise would you ever manage to cultivate compassion? This is very important to understand. People think, what is compassion? Generating compassion. And the Mahayana view of compassion that has always been the adorning quality of Buddha Dharma, which you and I all agree is one of the most supreme qualities to cultivate. But compassion can never be understood if the mind doesn't understand emptiness and interdependence. Because compassion, if it is objective, then immediately it becomes partial and biased, because your compassion is being imposed upon what your senses are seeing. Natural compassion is where there is no bias, no partiality. We say that is true compassion, true altruism. What does non-bias and non-partiality mean is you do not credit or discredit anything because you appreciate the manyness of everything. When you begin to understand the manyness of everything, you're at peace with all components. There is no one thing greater or more credible than the other. And therefore, when there is no duality, where there is no separation, where there's a sense of appreciation of everything, you embody compassion. And then that compassion is just who you are. That's called being compassionate, which is very different from doing compassion. Doing compassion comes when your compassion is projected, imposed upon a certain object, and that is always very much in danger of being tainted by bias and partiality, because you're seeing part of the whole, you're not seeing the whole. Now, if you take this as an example, you will find, I always think about my teachers, for example, great teachers. Particularly if I look at my own root teacher, His Holiness Khandro Rinpoche, my father, who's also my guru. Then some of you who have known such a great master, such as Rinpoche as well as Khandro Rinpoche, you will find that they don't really do much anything. If you really look at teachers, of these great teachers, we have this sort of thought that, because they are great teachers, so that they have a busy schedule, sort of. But if you really live with them, you will find one thing is, they really don't do much at all. They're almost sort of on the bed all the time. That's how these great teachers are. Of course, those of you who haven't met think they have this black diary. 6:30 get up, 7 o'clock this, 7:15 meet with them, 8 o'clock do this. This is how we live. And then we try to be, I have to be compassionate in the morning once, in the afternoon twice, 4 times in the evening, for a week, 42 different sets of compassion. Have I been generous? Check this, ethic check, discipline check, and so on and so forth. And it's amazing, because we do work very hard. And we do like to imagine that you're being kind, you're being of service to the others, and so on and so forth. But I've often encountered this situation where we will have been so kind to a person, and this person will never get it. And then you take this person to these teachers who don't do anything much. The best that they will do is bump them on the head, or tap their cheek, or recite a few prayers, and it's about done in 2-3 minutes. And I have noticed that so many people come out of that experience having understood what unconditional love is. And I always think, wait a minute, what happened? I've been kind to this person for the last 15 years. They never seem to understand what compassion is. Here they go in and see this, you know, a great teacher, but then you can also say a man on a bed who owns. And they come out with this experience of unconditional love. You may have also experienced it in the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. 15,000 people in a basketball stadium sees the Dalai Lama far out at the end during the bleachers, and then you come out trusting basic goodness, you know, and he doesn't even know you exist. But on the other hand, you're inspired. Maybe it doesn't last long, but for the week, I have noticed visible changes in people who are not even Buddhists, who don't even know what it is all about. But then there's a sense of, yes, happiness is good. To be kind is a wonderful quality of a human being. Now, why does it happen? It's because those who are compassionate have that power, which is so much more powerful than those of us who do kindness, who are trying to engage in an action of kindness. But being compassionate, that kind of an enlightenment, these qualities of the great masters, our teachers as well as the Dalai Lama, the power that they have is that in their mind, the compassion is not subject to and dependent upon actions, because they exude that compassion. Since their mind is free from all kinds of bias and partiality, that they have understood just the basic ground of compositeness. There is no duality of right and wrong. There is no discrepancy or a sort of duality of any kind of bias and partiality. And therefore, since everything that they are is done with the wisdom of knowing the nature of emptiness, of interdependence, of impermanence, and within that realization as their mind rests, that is then felt by this mind of ours, because that's the nature. When the nature recognizes the nature itself, there's an affinity, there's a connection between them. And therefore, in order to be able to reach that kind of realization, for our mind to have the possibility of having the same awakenedness as the great gurus, it is here that it has to begin to rest beyond the duality, which can only happen when you observe the nature of impermanence and allow yourself to be free from the struggles and the suffering of trying to consolidate permanence. Relaxation comes from that you relax within the nature of impermanence. In the same way, view emptiness nature. Ultimately, if a tree is empty of being a tree, because there is no tree-ness, there are leaves, there are branches, there are stems, there's colors, there's shoot, there's twigs, there are barks, there are different fibers, there's the root, there's the seed. Ultimately, a gathering of all these have been labeled a tree. In the same way, you begin to notice that's the same. Not only with a tree, but with your likes, with your dislikes, with your passions, your aggressions, with your hopes, with your fears, that it's not singular. That there are so many aspects to it. You can't pinpoint exactly where fear rests or where hope rests. And that it is so much sinking into delusion, thinking there is a singular hope. You don't even know what it is. It's just 4 letters of the alphabet. H-O-P-E. It's not in the H, it's not in the O, it's not in the P, it's not in the E. But then we allow that arbitrary word to become so much a label, we fix it and we just suppose. I have a lot of hopes, I have a lot of hopes. Write down what you hope for and we can barely think of 2 or 3. But then we then stress ourselves with hope. What do you hope for, we say? Oh, many things. Long life, good health, enlightenment. For Buddhists we say enlightenment. My heart to be kind. Is that really what you hope for? I don't think so. No, but I have hope. I have a lot of hope. I'll go back home and I'll think carefully what I really hope for. As a child, I remember my sister and I used to always joke about this. We used to read the story of Aladdin, the genie. You rub the lamp and the genie comes. And then in Tibetan stories, also folk tales, we have a lot of fairies and bodhisattvas appearing and saying, I'm going to give you 3 boons. What will you ask for? And my sister used to always ask me, if you ever happen to come across a genie, what would you ask for? I always found it very difficult to bring everything down to 3, because that seems to be the number that most of them say. I'll give you 3 boons. What do you want? If it was 1 boon, then it would be even much more work. So I used to always joke and say, I'm going to say, I need only one thing, that all my wishes be accomplished. Of course, that was one way of looking at, you don't even have an idea what you're wishing for, what you're afraid of. But then we do have these labels of things that we have become fixated upon, not knowing the nature of what it is. So as an observer, observe the nature of your hope, observe the nature of your fear. Observe the nature of everything that you are fixating upon, love, or kindness, or suffering, or pain. What is the nature of pain? What is the nature of suffering? In the very beginning of that analysis, you will have some vague assumptions of where the suffering is coming from. But then don't stop and go deeper into seeing, is it really coming from that? Is it really out there? This glass, I think, I don't like cut crystal glasses. I always drink from a mug, a Tibetan monk with a lid. And I keep looking at the glass and I think, the person's wrong. The one who placed it didn't read the manual of how to receive a teacher program. I'm just making this up. But then if I keep pointing it, very soon everything will be pinpointed. I won't hear any other sound. I won't see any other thing. I won't be thinking of any other thought. But the fact that the water is placed in a wrong vessel, wrong container. It is in that same way. Therefore, to look at, see where does that problem come from, and definitely it's not the glass. The glass is not at fault. Neither is the mug that is absent at fault. Neither is it the person at fault. Fault very much is how much you're making it into a very big deal. Ultimately, it comes to one's own self. And therefore, being able to really look at labels and things and whether it really exists as you think, especially within the internal phenomena, your own likes and dislikes. What is the nature of any liking beyond your thinking you like? What is the nature of any dislike? What is the nature of any pain beyond your own assumption that you do not like the pain? So ultimately you begin to see nothing exists out much there other than within one's own self. Therefore, it is at that time when you begin to observe change and you see everything changes, the permanency is simply your mind thinking it is permanent. Nothing else is permanent. In the same way, what is the nature, the reality of everything, and understanding interdependence, seeing everything is essentially born out of the empty nature which accommodates all the compoundedness to come together into something, and we assume, and it is only my assumption that labels it in a certain way, with which I fixate upon, that gives it life of permanency. And therefore, again, it is my own perspective. Now, what is the nature of mind itself? That's the third observation. And therefore, first take time to observe impermanence. Second, take time to observe interdependence, which leads to also understanding the impermanent nature, the nature of impermanence, nature of emptiness of all inner and outer phenomena, and then lead it to the third step, which is called view of self-awareness. Here at this point, simple question comes is, who's seeing this? Who's knowing this? Who is hoping this? Who sees emptiness? Who sees or tries to attempt to make it permanent? Who sees change and who's trying to make it stagnant, not change? And therefore begin to then, here as the text Khandro says, arises from the question, who perceives? Who is the knower? Who is the perceiver? What is the nature of the one who knows? Who is that who discerns? Which is usually called trying to analyze, examine the nature of mind. Beginning with knowing mind. I am here. You're listening to me. The one who hears the sound. The one who understands. The one who doesn't understand. Both of this, all of this, the capacity with which you are working, That's what we mean by mind. So if we say, what do we mean by mind? What is mind? Is mind here? Is mind there? We have all these questions. That's all not so necessary. Mind is just to be understood as the one who's hearing the sound in air conditioner, the one who feels the pain, the one who hears the sound, the one who can look and see a physical form, the one who is thinking. Those are all the capacities of mind. So therefore, when you work with this third view, cultivating this third preliminary observation, you have to simply say, again, formally or informally, and say, the one who notices the movement of traffic on the road, if you're observing the road, is just my mind. My mind is watching the traffic. Now here, looking carefully at what is the nature of the one who is looking at it. What does it look like? Here, therefore, the Madhyamika or the Mahayana teachings say, what is the nature of mind? Does it have color? Does it have shape? Does it have form? And you have to examine, does it have color? Does it have shape? Does it have form? Beyond your thinking and labeling it to be mind, what is its nature? What does it really look like? And so one of the very poignant sort of analysis that I find very, very helpful is the simple question that is asked in the Dzogchen teachings, which says, what is the nature of the present thought? Such as, hearing this air conditioner is your present thought. What is the nature of this present thought, of this present moment's awareness? There's the pervading awareness within which there is a thought. What is the nature of that thought in this present moment's awareness? And you rest. If you think there is, try to see. If you think it is objective enough that you can see it, then you must see its form. Is it square? Is it round? Is it oblong? Is it horizontal? Is it vertical? Does it have a different kind of form? Is it out there? Is it in there? You can't see it, therefore it is not visible. Since it is not visible, one would also then find it doesn't seem to have a color. It doesn't seem to have any kind of a shape or different kind of a shade to it. Since it is not visible, since it doesn't seem to be any color or form oriented, what is it? I think, and I think therefore it is. As the Buddha himself says, reality is given because you think it is there. That's all there is to it. Beyond your thinking of it, what is the nature of it really like? And it's very difficult to find any other word other than emptiness. And it's not because of any other reason that all teachers and teachings talk about emptiness, nature of the mind, emptiness, nature of the mind. Ultimately, you really have no other vocabulary for it but to say it is shunyata. It isn't amounting to anything. Shunyata, the Sanskrit term, often means, in the colloquial term, it means zero. But on the other hand, shunyata, which is translated as emptiness into English, can actually evoke one sense, which simply means doesn't amount to being anything, doesn't consolidate to being anything. You can't find anything in it. So therefore, a lot of people also translate it as nothingness. Now therefore, here the Khandro says, look at three aspects of the mind. The mind has three qualities. When you observe the nature of any present thought in this moment's awareness, within this moment's awareness, you will always find natural emptiness as one quality of the mind. Since you can't find it, you can't locate it, you can't pinpoint what exactly it may have or as a physical form or any shade or color to it. Therefore, one concludes that the nature of the mind is naturally emptiness. That's the first quality of the mind. But this does not mean that it isn't endowed with the second quality, which is natural cognizance, which is therefore called natural cognizance, the second quality of the mind. It can't be seen, but it can hear. It can think. It is very vivid. It has its own power of lucid wakefulness that can, through the pathways of the senses, be very much aware of sound, of forms, of perceptions of different kinds, and therefore locate, observe that while it is emptiness in nature, it is also naturally cognizant, it is naturally vivid, it is naturally awake. Third quality of the mind then is said to be the union, that these two are not self-opposing or contradictory to one another, that they are not mutually exclusive, but that they are inclusive, they are union, that because it is awake doesn't mean it is there, it is empty. It is empty, but it doesn't mean it is empty off, it is still awake. And therefore a sense of appreciation of the non-dual nature of mind as being something that cannot be found as a solid object, yet is everywhere, and therefore resting within that. The 3 sessions of meditation, observations of meditation, is simply that. Whether you do it in the shrine with all your gongs and incense and butter lamps, that's also very fun. But anywhere that you are, in a coffee break, or going out for a walk, or taking your dogs for a walk, or whatever it is that simply sit there for a little while, observe change, observe impermanence, observe the arbitrary labels that you give to things that are essentially empty in nature. Appreciate, open your mind vast to the interdependent nature of everything. You can't say which is what. Your world has to just be composite of so many things, that rather, because you see the compositeness of so many things, you don't find any place where you can say, I like this better, or I like this worse, or this is friends and this is enemies, or anything like that. But the mind just has a sense of pervasive space that accommodates and becomes the basis of deepened appreciation of the wholesomeness of everything. And that which recognizes is your mind, the nature of which is empty. It is cognizant within the union of this brilliant, awakened, empty nature of the mind, simply remaining without moving. This leads you directly to the first verse that we are working with, which says, relax and release your mind. If you have the root text, I'm reading the 3rd line of the first verse. First, relax and release your mind, neither scattered nor concentrated, without thoughts. Now, because you are looking at change, because you're looking at interdependent and emptiness, and because you're looking at the nature of mind, it is a skillful way of bringing about mind and not allowing it to be distracted, scattered, nor are you fixated upon an agenda-driven meditation. Agenda-driven meditation is, I'm going to sit for 15 hours and I hope I get brilliant realization within that kind of a moment, within that period of a moment. Or those things such as, why don't I see the deity, or am I becoming enlightened, or is this a good experience, or is that a bad experience? None of those different kinds of distractions of over-concentrating, nor without any kind of mental chatter, while resting in this even state at ease is where we are. Resting at ease within that. Naturally, simply rest within that natural ease of simply knowing things are impermanent, allowing you to be free from your stubborn demand that they become permanent. Observing interdependence of everything, opening your mind to simply being the basis, like the space that holds everything. Let your mind rest within the knowing the nature of space, the emptiness of everything, accommodating and allowing everything to be there, appreciating everything. Simply the vastness that embraces all phenomena in their various manifestations. And most importantly, looking at your own mind, its essential empty nature that is brilliant and awake, that it can see everything in its various forms. However, the nature of that which sees it is emptiness itself, simply at ease, remaining there, is the first method of the practices. Now here, before we get to the pet section of the text, the next line says, then utter a shout out of big shattering pet. Usually I'm a little bit conservative about the pet aspect of it. So however, before you get into that, study this meditation. As Dhamma Rodorok's teachings, which are very, very helpful, he says here this, and I will read his quote to you here, which says, view and meditation can be explained in many different ways. But sustaining the essence of mind includes them all. So there are, as he says, view can be explained in many different ways. For days and days and months and years of teachings that explain the view. There are those ways. All are very helpful. There are many different kinds of meditation, shamatha, vipassana, dzogchen, mahamudra. Within each of them, there are several subcategories and different forms of meditation, formless meditation, meditation according to this tradition, meditation according to that tradition. All of them are wonderful, skillful means. They can be explained in many different ways. But, as Khandro says, Khandro says, sustaining the essence of mind, knowing it to be emptiness, inseparable from its cognizant awakenedness, includes them all. And therefore, your mind, as he says, your mind, you should, as a meditator, you should know that your mind can't be found anywhere else. It is just present in this present thought. Wherever you are, whichever thought you have, within that moment itself, you have liberation. You have the understanding of the absolute nature. You don't have to wait for tomorrow's thought. You don't have to wait for a good thought. You don't have to particularly wait for a Buddhist thought or a pure thought. Wherever you are able to breathe and be aware, within this present moment, the thought that arises within your own awareness, within that itself carries every moment the potency of enlightenment, because it is within that that you can actually glimpse and see the union of emptiness and luminosity. It is, as he says, your mind cannot be found anywhere. It is just your present thought. Don't chase after that thought, you'll have plenty more. You don't have to chase after that. Whatever comes, whatever is in the present now, simply remain. Just look into its essence. There is no duality. No observer, nothing to observe. Since it is empty in nature, therefore there is nothing to observe. There is no one observer. Freeing from any sense of holding on to an observer or something to observe. No, again, as the text says, it is empty, since it is not a concrete substance. It is cognizant, because it is aware in itself, by itself. These two are not separate, but a unity, nothing whatsoever, yet everything is experienced within this moment, recognizing that is the quintessence of every meditation that is there. When the emphasis of emptiness is described or emphasized, it is called the Sutra tradition. When the cognizant, the clarity aspect is emphasized, it is called the Tantra tradition. When the union of emptiness and clarity, or emptiness and luminosity, the cognizance, is explained, these are called Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings. These are the three streams that we study within. Emptiness, when you realize it, you should know this is the Sutra realization. You're realizing the essence of the meaning of all the Sutra teachings. When the clarity and the cognizant aspect, the awakened aspect is being glimpsed, one must understand, here is the essence of all the Tantra teachings. When you are able to understand the inseparableness of this emptiness and clarity, or the emptiness and cognizance, then one must understand, here is the moment when you are clearly becoming aware of what all the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen teachings have been imparted. So therefore, when we say things like, I'm a Mahamudra student, or I'm a Dzogchen student, then you must know what it means. It's not because of your association with the teachers. It's not because you can say things like Garabdoji and Manjushri Mitra and then consider yourself Dzogchen. Or you can say Telopa and Marpa and then consider yourself Mahamudra tradition or whatever it is. But rather, it is what you mean by saying, I am practicing Mahamudra and Dzogchen, is that you're alluding to the fact that you are able to glimpse more and more within the essential empty nature and it be inseparable from the cognizance, the awakenings. More and more you rest within that, the more and more truly one is accomplishing Mahamudra and the Dzogchen teachings. But in order to understand that, the aspects of Sutra and the Tantra teachings can never be disregarded. You have to go through the Sutra teachings and practices to understand what emptiness is, and likewise the Tantra teachings to understand the nature of luminosity. And so therefore, in this way, the preliminaries of observing transformation, observing emptiness and interdependence, and then thirdly, leading to observing self-awareness. What is the nature of the self leading to then simply the actual practice. Now, as I said, before you get to the pit, get to the actual practice, which is in the root text simply referred to as resting in natural ease. How to rest in natural ease, now from a methodical perspective, is said to be by cultivating the three qualities. Now again, to summarize what we have been talking about is knowing you're working with a secret guru, train oneself to reach a state of simple, non-distracted, relaxed, natural ease, resting within that natural ease. If one finds it difficult to get to that point immediately, always take the help of the three observations that we spoke about until you come to a point where you are able to see everything is observed by the mind, its nature is empty, yet awake, nature of mind is emptiness and cognizant awakeness, inseparable, simply rest there. Within that resting, then inculcate the three qualities, cultivate the three qualities, which allows the natural resting to arise. In the Dzogchen tradition, the teachings or the three methods are called rest fresh, rest effortlessly, just rest. When we refer to resting in the nature of mind, natural ease is the often used terminology. To understand it clearly, you may need to describe it a little bit more. And when you describe it by understanding what are the qualities and the characteristics of natural resting, these three are mentioned. Work with resting fresh, work with resting effortlessly, and cultivate the third quality called just resting. Resting fresh is being undistracted. When you really look at the emptiness, cognizance, inseparable nature of emptiness and luminosity, you are resting there. Make sure that you rest fresh, and that means undistracted, resting in an undistracted state, which is not disturbed or deterred by any internal or external objects. That's called resting fresh. Rest in each moment, fresh moment. It should not be preoccupied with thoughts of any past or future or present moment. Internal thoughts of, am I doing this correctly? What do I get from this? Is this the right way to breathe? Is this the right way to look? Should I open my eyes? Should I close my eyes? But my grandmother was so unkind to me. Oh, my father, I have to meet him. How will I resolve that issue? I have my job to go back to. Should I check my text messages? Do I need to find out where my teacher is? Do I visualize my teacher? Am I feeling Buddhist enough today or not? All of these are internal chatters that often we bring into meditation thinking that this is a sort of a nice thing to do. This is a loyal thing to do. That this is a devotional thing to do. Not to do that. Free your mind from any internal chatter. Who's meditating? Who's better at meditating? Am I meditating like the others are meditating? Why are so many people here? Why are so many people not here? Should I be meditating with them? Shouldn't I be meditating without them? They are disturbing my meditation. They do not know how enlightened I am. These are all ignorant sentient beings. Should I teach them how to meditate? These are busyness with the external things, not to be distracted. When you are resting within that meditation, I've always told you, you can always rest assured that these things you can return to anytime you want. They'll always be there. For this few moments that you are resting, give yourself a break from the inquisitiveness. Let go of all thoughts. let yourself be free from all the distractions of internal and external chatter. Simply remain in not observing anything, nothing to do, nothing to observe, nothing to pinpoint, nothing to obtain, nothing to look at, nothing to describe, nothing to articulate, not a moment to be intelligent. Just like that. Rest effortlessly means loosely, without controlling, without trying to control. And that's the worst thing that you can do to awakening to your own natural nature, is trying to control meditation. Nice ways to, number one this, number two that, should I do this way, should the lights be coming out, should I be luminous, what is clarity, what is emptiness, is this empty enough, is this luminous enough, never making the effort there. As normal, as ordinary, as naturally as you can be. That's called rest effortless. Just resting is the third, and that is, don't have to make it anything better or pure. Just resting simply has the need for just resting comes with just three things that you need to keep in mind. Self-knowing, self-clarity, self-purity. Knowing by its own self, you don't need to force knowing something. It knows itself. Self-clarity, it is clear if you let it be. You don't have to make it more clear. Self-purity, it is pure if left untouched, uninterfered, not interfered, or sort of not meddled with. By its own self, it is absolutely pure. Therefore, keep it, as a meditator, keep it in mind, you do not need to know something in meditation. And that's a very sort of a hard thing for, I think, the modern world to not do, because you would like to know it, you would like to see it, you would like to feel it. It has to all fit within a conceptual framework of your own intellectual mind. And that then becomes just another conceptual thought. So therefore, there's nothing to know. Just relax. In the same way, never make things clearer. It becomes unclear because you're trying to make it clear. Simply allow itself to reveal its clarity. Clarity is there when you do not interfere with that moment. Just let it be. It is pure by its own self. You do not need to make it pure. It is self-pure, and therefore you're not meddling, you're not fiddling with it, you're not interfering with it. Allows the self-purity to arise. That is called just resting. Knowing you do not have to know it, make it better, make it stronger, make it more empty, make it better pure. You do not have to do anything of these kinds, allowing yourself to rest knowing, self-knowing, self-clarity, self-purity. That is called rest fresh, rest effortlessly, just resting. Now, in order to enhance these three modes of resting, which are, if you bring them together, it is called natural ease. You hear this terminology a lot in the Dzogchen teachings, rest and natural ease. And so what is natural ease is these three kinds of resting. These three restings, if it is easy to hear, difficult to do. All of us who have tried it, it's very difficult to do. So therefore, those who are still on the levels of engaging and learning about how to rest properly should then format the resting within three kinds of meditation. In the Dzogchen tradition, it is called cultivating the state of non-distraction, cultivating the state of non-meditation, and cultivating the state of non-fabrication, which is very similar to the Mahamudras 4 yogas. 4 yogas in the Mahamudra tradition are often explained in the same ways. In the Dzogchen, the same is explained within these three states, what are called. State of non-distraction is said to be where the mind is not lost in the thoughts of the past. What happened, what was done, who did what, every thought of the past, simply let go. Empty your mind from pursuing all thoughts of the past. For that moment, just let the mind awaken itself, focusing in this present moment. That's called state of non-distraction. State of non-meditation is the second. where it says, release the present. Free the present moment by not holding on or grasping to any present thought. Don't modify this thought. Neither create something, nor stop something. Don't think of something. If something has appeared, don't grasp to it. If nothing has appeared, don't panic and make it emerge. Release the present moment from any contrivance and modifications or adaptations. When you release the present moment from any imputation or trying to impose something, superimposition, that is called state of non-meditation. Third is state of non-fabrication, that is non-aspiration. Many teachers also call state of non-fabrication as being state of non-aspiration, because this is a mind that is not thinking forward into the future. What will happen in the future? Will this state of meditation last long enough? Having different kinds of expectations, worrying whether you're meditating or will be able to meditate again or not. Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? All of the thoughts of the future, when they are cut, when they are let go of, it is called state of non-fabrication. So do not be distracted by the past. Don't consolidate the present. Do not pursue or fabricate the future. Therefore, state of non-distraction, non-meditation, non-fabrication. Simply, in other words, don't follow the past, don't grasp the present, don't invoke the future, simply rest, and therefore, when free from the thoughts of past, present, and future, one rests fresh, effortlessly, just resting, without any different kinds of distraction. That is called natural ease. So resting in this natural ease, giving yourself a total break from trying to be the epicenter of the universe, from any controlling, from any demands, from any expectation, freeing everything into its natural nature of change, impermanence, interdependence, and emptiness. Simply rest there. At that moment, find that this is who you naturally are. Everything else that you have been doing so far is just burdening this natural openness with layers and layers and layers of hopes and fears and expectations and different kinds of graspings and attachments and different kinds of many layers that you have added to this natural spacious nature which is within one's own self. And so if possible, in this meditation, do try to incorporate the breathing exercises of really inhaling deeply and exhaling deeply. In the beginning, deep inhalation, deep exhalation, until doing it several times until the force subsides into a natural rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, keeping in mind two things. With each inhalation, be awake, which is called attention. Allow the mind to not be dull or distracted. Awake with every inhalation, relax. And the relaxation with every exhalation, often the teachers describe as sighing. Instead of just exhaling, you could call it a deep sigh. A sigh where the exhalation completely, naturally loosens everything into a relaxed mode. Attention and awake, relax into the space. Attention and awake, relax into space. Attention and awake, and do it several times until it merges and the exhalation allows you to relax more and more and more. When the mind sort of settles the breath with the breath, settles into sighing into space, it is called simply relaxing into space. Then even letting go of any focus upon the breath, rest fresh, rest effortlessly, just rest. In between, post-meditation, observe change, interdependent nature, emptiness nature of everything, nature of your own mind, emptiness, cognizant, nothing to see, nothing to observe, within that union of luminosity and emptiness. Just rest, effortlessly, just rest, fresh, not following thoughts of the past, not following thoughts of the present, not grasping to present, not pursuing the future. Simply rest, giving yourself the first encounter, introducing yourself to the natural, spacious nature that is your basic nature. That's then called seeing the natural nature, face to face with what your natural nature is. When you take a break, feel the frustration of having to then cover you with past and present and future and permanency and hope and fear and expectation and so forth, and then feel the burden of it. Feel the burden of it so that it brings to become a sense of tiredness about it. And out of that is born renunciation, revulsion. When renunciation and revulsion increases, it encourages you to go back into recognizing that nature a little bit more with more natural rhythm. And then after lunch, we can see what to do with the pen. So I'll stop here for the morning session. Of course, it would be good if the lunch break we could do this exercise a little bit. Just see that. It might make a little bit more sense, especially if you are new to this, to know then what to do with the effect afterwards.
Yeah.